and I already know. But if there's anything that I could ever do, if you wanted to catch up, maybe you have a new good grilled cheese place you want to let me know about. For those of you who know that joke, it's Scrum Master, Certified Scrum Product Owner, those certified type things. That's a big part of our business. So in case you wanted to see how we work, feel free to check us out at sparkplugagility.com. One of the things that we concentrate a lot on the last couple of years is our advanced offerings. For those of you who are looking to take the next step, the 200 and 300 level classes of the Advanced Certified Scrum Master or the Certified Scrum Professional, the CSPSM, those are things that we really enjoy offering. So give us a shout, but enough about that. I need to tell you about some people who are very special to me, and it's my favorite team. And the reason I might pause a little bit when I see this picture is that I would have seen my friends and my teammates just recently, just this last couple of weekends, because every single year the world would descend in a certain location. And where we've been for the last many years has been a place called Las Vegas, Nevada. And we come together for a celebration, and it's a celebration in the spirit of competition all around video games. And the cool thing about this particular group of people that I'm so fortunate enough to do this with is that we've been together doing this for the better part of 20 years. And so when people say, is this, what's the favorite team you've been on? I have to tell you, the team I get to work on that event with, that's my team, and that's my favorite team. And when I think about this group, I say, is it a real team? I say it's even more than a real team. It's something special. The reason why is that the bonds between us are stronger than you would really run into sometimes in some professional environments. This is not the only thing I do. This is something that does take up a big part of my life. But these, I can't even say friends for a lot of these folks. The reason why is that if something happened to me, the first call would be to my wife, my immediate family, but then this group would get the call right afterwards. We've been there for the most powerful moments of each other's lives, moments of power of attorney, weddings, funerals, all that stuff. And these are folks that I dearly miss. I would have been out on the West Coast multiple times this year, and because of current events, we weren't able to have this event, which is really sad. But when I think of this group, I think of three words. And the three words I think of is that we're very diverse. We come from a lot of different backgrounds. We bring a lot of different things to the table. One of us is just, from an execution standpoint and from a getting the mission done, one of the best you'll ever meet in the world. Another, just the most brilliant mind for strategy, deliberate decision-making, making the hard call. We all have a part to play in all of this. And I miss this group a lot. What makes that group very special to me is that we are aligned because we're trying to create an environment for the most powerful moments in some young people's lives. And we're trying to create that environment together. There are volunteers that come in just to volunteer their time. And it's just heartwarming to see. But the most important word that I think of when I think of my team is that we are a family. These are the folks that I am the closest with in my entire life. And it hurts my heart that I can't see them right now. We talk when we can, but being in the same place is wonderful. And these are just the three words I would offer up. When I think of my team, my favorite team, my best team, diverse, aligned, and family. So the first question I would ask you is, think about the people that you're around the most, the people that you do work with. And what words would you pick? Would there be those three? Would they be a little bit different? And you're thinking about it, you're like, are we even really a team? Because that's the first question I would ask, be like, are you really a team? Or are you more like one of those working groups that you'll see out there? Like you have the book club at work where it's like, we'll all read a chapter of this business success story and give the oral report every month. You probably Center of Excellence stuff. Well, it's funny because a good friend of mine, we would do things like, hey, is the meeting on? Be like, I don't know, are they in? And it gets moved. One of those. Wasn't really a team. It was more like a group of individuals. Is it really a team? You're like, well, what would a team look like? Well, what I want to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I think a team is. And it's really encompassed in this one very powerful sentence. Here's how I would say to think of what a team is. This is what a team would be. A team is a small number of people. And this small group, they have a set of skills that complement one another. And they rally around and they commit to a common goal. Common purpose. What are we trying to get done? And what are our performance goals that are tied to that purpose? How do we work together? They're around this common, shared, and agreed upon way of working for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. Think about that. That's a real big sentence. So when I say, hey, are you a team? Oh, yeah. I say, well, this is what I think a team is. Are you a team? They're like, well, what do some of those things mean? Well, let's go ahead and decompose a couple of them, because I want to go ahead and give you some things to think about, because teams could range anywhere from 2 to 25 or more. But most of the teams that I research and the things that you'll probably encounter well, the most effective teams normally number less than 10 people. The reason why is because think about when people come together. You have lines of communication you have to maintain between people. You've got lines of communication with 1, 2, 3, 4. That can get a little bit crazy. But you also have relationships, bonds, friendships. That type of angle, not everybody always considers, because when you have a team of anywhere from 3 to 6, think about just the lines of communication. Lines can be, okay, I got to talk to these people. It's not so bad, but you've got some relationships to think about as well. As you start to add a couple more people, suddenly more lines start to cloud the picture. And just in looking at 10 compared to 5, think about how many signals can get crossed. Think about how the waters could be a little bit muddied. Think about how you can miss a message, misinterpret something. Suddenly you start to add more and more and more and more, and it starts to get real cloudy real quick. So the things to think about when people are like, hey, small enough in number, what does that mean? I say, hey, are you small enough in number? Some people say, oh yeah, we're small enough in number. And I would follow it up and say, okay, well, can you guys convene easily and frequently without like a whole lot of unnecessary coordination? Think about those lines right there, just there. Imagine getting room on the schedule for 10 people. Hey, can I send you a meeting? When are you good? When are you good? If you're like me, you get caught in that sometimes, and that can be real frustrating, let alone for 14. So are you small enough in number? Maybe, maybe not. That's only one component of it. Think about this from a skills standpoint. Do you have the right mix of skills? When I say that, what normally you think of in your head is, okay, what would you see on a job description? And that's the trap. The reason why is that you need the right mix of skills, not just technical, but also functional. And the reason I say, hey, technical and maybe non-technical or functional, you'll see the different terminology. Do you have the right mix, the expertise to do the job? Because imagine if you have some doctors, and these doctors are trying to write some, respond to like some legal documentation there, and like not a lawsuit, but trying to get some things, policies through. Well, would you want doctors writing legal documentation, or would you want them maybe working with corporate counsel, calling in some lawyers? Well, you probably want the lawyers doing that, just like you would want the doctors worrying about that treatment, because I don't know about you, I probably wouldn't want my lawyer giving me my medical advice, just like I wouldn't want my doctor to go ahead and respond to a contract. Now, I love them both, but stay in your lane. That complement is key, but that's only a part of things, because you also need to have the right mix of problem solving and decision-making skills. Think about it. Do you have someone that you work with, that you're close with, or that you've worked with in the past, that was really smart, but they couldn't think their way out of a paper bag, dry or wet? That's a tough spot to be in, but you have to be able to be, hey, what are the options we have? How do we evaluate that? How do we pick which we're going to move forward? You have to have those types of skills as well to go along with that expertise to do the job. But those are only two pieces of the puzzle. There's a third type to consider when you're talking about the mix of skills: the interpersonal skills, soft skills. You ever met someone who's not really a people person? You might know somebody, some of you might have a friend or a coworker. It's not too much of a people person. Think about it. You know someone who's really smart, can really make that decision, and you really don't want to be around them too much. Think about that friend or coworker you would never want to put in front of a prospective client. Do you have one of those? Maybe they don't have those interpersonal or soft skills. Maybe they don't possess those, and that's okay, but this is something that we all have to consider. Because when you're looking at this group of people, do we have the capacity for effective communication? Can we actually have that passionate debate that sometimes we need to? You have to consider the mix of all of these things to have the right mix of skills, not just what you see on that job posting. So when I ask the question, do you have the right mix of skills? A lot of folks say, oh yeah, we have the tools to do the job. And when you get to this level, you say, well, do you have this? Do you have this? Can you actually talk to one another? Not every team does. Something to consider. Now there's another part to all this that I would like to offer up. And this is where a lot of teams start to feel right in here whenever I talked about this. Because I say, why does this group come together? What's the reason that you even exist? Because you have to have some kind of a purpose. There has to be a really good reason. You have to have something that's real, something that's meaningful, something that's going to get you out of bed at 0500 and get out there on 66, driving on in, wiping the sleep out of your eyes. There better be a pretty good reason for that, because this common and meaningful purpose, this sets the tone. This is the whole reason that the team exists as a group. But in addition to that, you have to have some sort of performance goals that are tied to that purpose. And when I say that, these are things that you can look at and say, okay, we're observing this thing, and those are directly tied to the reason we're coming in. That's where a lot of folks fall down, because when people hear performance, they think metrics. When I think performance, I think about attributes and behaviors. How do we act? How do we interact with one another? How do we work together? Those are the things I'm looking for. But I always look for this right here. Do we have a reason for coming together? And do we have some goals tied to that purpose? And that's what I want you to remember. It's the mix, the combination of these things that's essential for teams that really want to take the step and call themselves a real team. Do you have a reason for coming in? And what do you look at to see if you're actually making that purpose a reality? Now, how are you going to make that purpose a reality? Well, you have to work together. And teams, when they come together, hopefully they would develop a common, shared, and agreed upon way of working. When you do this, then it's, hey, not just how we work, it's how are we going to make that purpose a reality? When everyone has a hand in how we do business, those are the ways of work that really stick. But here's something to consider. Teams need to spend about the equivalent amount of time crafting not just their purpose, but how they're going to make that purpose a reality. Why are we coming together? How are we going to make that happen? So when I ask you, hey, do you have a purpose? Do you have performance goals? That's one thing. But it's another thing saying, hey, do you have an agreed upon way of working? People go, oh yeah, we all attended the internal training, signed a piece of paper that said we do the Scrum. Okay. But is it really a common agreed upon way of work? I could feel the laughter through the camera. But that's the thing. It has to be tied to that purpose. So if we can say, do we have the skills? Are we small enough in number? We have our purpose. Do we have a way of making that purpose a reality? Do we have some goals tied to that purpose? There's another piece that I want you to think about. Because when I say one particular word that you're about to see, the first word that comes to mind a lot of time is blame. And that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about accountability. Too often when I talk to folks about accountability, they think, who needs to be called to the carpet? Who do we need to have the hard talk with? Accountability is about the sincere promises that we make to one another, our teammates, rooted in commitment and in trust. The only time you will ever see me read directly from a slide is right now, because I want you to go ahead and give this sentence a read. Just take a look at it. By promising to hold ourselves accountable to the team's goals, we each earn the right to express our own views about all aspects of the team's effort and to have our views receive a fair and constructive hearing. See something? Say something. That's what some people say. That's one team used to be like, hey, if you see something, we need to be able to say something. Basically, you can call each other out. And some people say, oh, I have teammates that have no problem standing up and calling somebody out. But is it really in that spirit of teamwork? Or is it really just someone who's a little bit more argumentative? Think about that. The sincere promises that we're going to do everything we can to make something a reality. And if we see something where people aren't pulling their weight or something is wrong with how we're working, we should say something. No group can ever call themselves a team until they get to this place where they can hold themselves accountable to one another. Think about the difference in these two statements. The boss holds me accountable. That's a little bit different than we hold ourselves accountable. Think of that subtle difference. And the questions that I would ask, people go, oh yeah, we're accountable to one another. I say, are you? And they say, oh yeah. And I say, well, does everybody on the group have an idea of what they're individually and jointly responsible for? And do they actually talk about this? It's like, well, no, not really. We just kind of go back to our cube. It's like, these are interesting things to think about. Because if you look at all of these different pieces, are you really a team? Are you small enough in number? Do you have the right mix of skills? Technical, functional, problem solving, decision making, interpersonal and soft skills. Some groups don't even get to that. Normally where a lot of folks find is, hey, do you have a common and meaningful purpose? And I don't mean like one person's like the leader of the team, their purpose or some overarching ambiguous thing, but like something real, something meaningful. Do you have that? Does everyone on the team communicate it the same way? If you put people in different rooms and say, what's the reason your team is together? Do they get excited and like really like a lot of fire in their eyes when they talk about why they come in? Or is it just, yeah, we respond to customer feedback. We respond to customer feedback. That doesn't really get me out of bed in the morning. So what's our purpose? Do we have some goals tied to that purpose? Do we have a shared and agreed upon way of working to make that purpose a reality? And do we really hold ourselves accountable to each other? Each of these pieces are things that you can think about. The reason why I wanted to break it down that way is I want to give you a couple takeaways. Here's some things to think about. You always want to consider the mix of those different types of skills. Do not just get caught up in those technical pieces. We need this language, we need this technology, cloud this. Consider the decision-making, consider the interpersonal. You always want to go ahead and revisit your purpose as a group. That new hire that just came on, talk about it. Haven't talked about it in a little while? Maybe revisit it. Think about how you would communicate it to somebody who just joined the team. You want to ensure whatever performance goals that you come up to tie directly to your team's purpose. That's what I want you to really think about. Anything, the reason you're coming together, make sure whatever it is that you measure and look at, make sure it ties to that purpose. And you want to make sure that you spend an equal amount of time crafting that way of working as you do of crafting that approach, the purpose and the approach. Make sure to spend the right amount of time, equal amount of time. You want to really sit down as a team and discuss what accountability really means. You want to discuss what it means. Think about that definition I shared with you. If you ask 5 different people what they think accountability is, there's a chance you're going to hear 5 different definitions. So those are some conversations to have. If you can concentrate on these basic attributes of a team, you can really get somewhere. And I've already got you thinking on a couple things, but I want to kind of expand a little bit more. Think back to where I showed you those little dots and all those lines of communications, all those relationships. Well, when I think about teammates interacting with one another, there's sometimes people you have chemistry with. And there's times when you might butt heads a little bit. And there's times when it's just kind of, but when I say this particular word to some people, it really strikes home. And I want you to give this particular word and its accompanying definition a read. Think about the word dysfunction. When I say dysfunction, when I'm working with our clients and our students, here's how I like to talk about what a dysfunction would be. An abnormal or unhealthy interpersonal behavior, something between people. Normally it happens within a group. So thinking about that, you're like, are these things that you experience? And can you give me some things to think about? I'm actually going to give you 5 words to think about. But before I go any further, I don't want you to think bad Scrum or whatever way you're working. The reason why is whenever I get into this, a lot of times it's they don't have a shared understanding of their way of working. And a lot of things can be traced to that root cause as opposed to this actual behavior. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the first word. I'm going to get a little swig of water real quick. Sorry for that, Mike. When you think about when people come together and you ask them, here's a word. I want you to think about this one word. And if you had to draw a picture of that one word, what would you draw? And this is actually inspired, this picture you see here is inspired by one student drew once. Because what do you think of in your head when I say the word trust? When I say trust, you might think of a lot of things. Some people think of trust as like, oh, well, when I think about trust, I think of, oh, Billy's going to show up to work on time because, I trust that you're going to show up to work on time, or trust that you're always going to do good work. I want you to think about it a little bit differently. I want you to think about trust as a situation where you can be around other people and be a little bit less guarded. You can be a little bit more vulnerable. You can drop the shields just a little bit. You make yourself more human. When you can be exposed and vulnerable around other people, then they can see your true self. If you're working with folks who you would call your teammates and you always have those guards up, and you're just hiding back, sonic boom, hanging back, maybe you don't trust each other. Maybe you have an absence of trust. And this is a very, very rocky foundation to build any house on. If there's an unwillingness to be vulnerable in front of your teammates, bad things can happen, because if you're not open with one another to actually share what's going on, you can't build a house on that. You really can't. If you're always guarding yourself, veiling your comments, talking behind, dangerous things can happen. So the question to ask is, do you trust each other? Does your team trust each other, or do you have an absence of trust? Well, here's some things to think about. These are some behaviors. Teams that would trust one another, one behavior you might see would be this. Teammates would actually admit their weaknesses. I messed up. But they do that knowing that they won't be hurt, because that's what trust is about, being vulnerable and exposed where whatever you say won't be used against you later. Teams with an absence of trust, this is a team that would conceal those weaknesses and mistakes from one another. I can't mess up. If I mess up, then I'm going to lose that promotion to one of my teammates, and I can't do that. I might say, pop your hand up if you've ever seen anything like that before. Well, I might be speaking to a few of you, so think about it. Do you see that on one side, or do you see the other? Well, here's something else to think about. Teams that trust one another, this is Group that would maybe take risks in offering feedback, assisting other people, or straight up asking for help. This might seem a little familiar to some of you, but if it isn't, this is just how I present this particular topic. The team that would have an absence of trust, this is a group that would maybe hesitate to actually ask for help. They would maybe stop and hold back from offering that constructive feedback that could help somebody out. Because if you see someone struggling and you offer that up and you get lashed on, I wonder why. So think about it. Does your team trust one another? Or do you not? Because this is the foundation for everything. So trust, that's a pretty big word. I'm going to offer up the second word to you right now. The second word is a pretty fun one. By the way, the second word is not nothing like that. The second word brings up some very interesting feelings for my students and my clients when I say it. When I say this word, I want you to think about how it makes you feel inside. Think about what it would be physically, emotionally, because think about what goes on in your head and inside your body, in your heart, when you hear the word conflict. When you say conflict to people think a street fight. That's not what I want you to think about with conflict, because sometimes you lose sight that conflict isn't always a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing. You can have constructive forms of conflict, but you could also have destructive forms of conflict. You ever walked into a room and you see people passionately debating like, oh, we need to try this technology. No, I've tried that before. And like hands are moving and voices are raised. You might have seen something like that. And just because voices were raised and emotions were high, you ever consider that might not have been a terrible thing? They were having that passionate debate, which is different than a destructive form of conflict where maybe someone throws a pen at one another, not in a nice way. So thinking about that, teams might need to have that passionate and unfiltered debate. But if they can't, maybe they have a fear of conflict. Maybe this is a group that does not have the ability to engage in those passionate, unfiltered debate, those arguments that need to happen. This is a tough spot because you may have been in a room with your team, what you thought was your team, and you see something and suddenly you have to guard yourself a little bit more. Maybe you aren't able to go ahead and passionately debate that thing that you really, really care about. You have some information that you don't want to share, so you hold back a little bit. Why? Well, if you're worried about conflict from that standpoint, because you think it's going to go into a bad place, why is that? Well, maybe you cannot be open, unguarded, and vulnerable around your teammates because you don't trust one another. You can't have this debate. Now, some behaviors to think about. Do you fear conflict, or are you okay with it? Well, here's one thing to think about. Teams that actually can engage in this type of discussion, they're going to actually pull out the ideas of everyone who's involved. When you can get everyone's ideas on the tables as opposed to that one really smooth talking, quick on their feet or just loud thinker, if you get everybody's ideas on the table, you can take advantage of all those ideas. But a team that fears conflict, this is where you miss out on that opportunity. Have you ever felt like you were that person who couldn't get a word in edgewise? I feel for you if that's the case. I've been there, believe it or not. It's very, very frustrating. But the team collectively failed to tap into what you're bringing to the table. It bums me out. Maybe this is a group that fears conflict. Teams that actually can engage in conflict like this, constructive conflict, they're going to actually talk about those critical topics, get the stuff on the table they need to, as opposed to ignoring those things. Ignoring those topics that might be critical to the team's success. Think about the situations where you've been together and everyone's like, I wish someone would just say it. And they didn't. I wish somebody else would say it. You fear that conflict. Why do you fear that conflict? Maybe it's because you don't trust each other. So think about it. Do you see more behaviors on one side or the other? So those are two big words, trust and conflict. I want to hit you with the third word. The third word is a big word. It's an important word to me. When you think about when someone makes a commitment to one another, let's get this done. The handshake deal. Hopefully no one's shaking hands right now. Like, no, I don't even fist bump anymore. Former students are like, do you do the handshake? No. We just stick with the waves right now. When you actually have a group of people commit not to like a PMO or a customer, but to one another of, hey, here's my part of making sure that we win. That feels good. And I do that with my squad, my team all the time. But not every team can do that because some teams are actually a little bit worried and they lack the conviction to make a call and make a commitment to something and not make that important decision. This can get you in a lot of trouble. Think about a group that would delay that important decision, kick it down the road We just want to make sure that we're right. You ever go into that meeting where it's like, we're still not there. Let's go ahead and put it off. And maybe we can schedule it in a week and a half. I'm in Disney World. I can't make it there. Okay, maybe in 2 weeks. Some people are perfectly happy doing that. And this is a situation where teams rarely buy in, make a call. They might even, like I say, pump fake. That's some slang I use. Yeah, I'm all for that. Yeah, so yeah, kind of. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They might say that they're on board, but they're really not. They didn't get everybody's ideas on the table. So how can they rally around anything? It's a bad spot to be in. Well, if we can't agree on this thing because we don't have everybody's ideas on the table, why don't we have everyone's thoughts out? Well, maybe not everybody offered them up because they were worried about that constructive conflict. Well, why couldn't they have that passionate, unfiltered debate? Because they were worried that someone was actually going to write everything down and escalate it, so they don't trust one another. See how these all build on one another? Think about, does your team have a lack of commitment, or do you actually commit to one another? Here's some decisions to think about. Teams that actually make these commitments to one another, they are very clear about what decisions they're trying to make, what their priorities are, and how they're going to work together to make those real. Teams that fail to commit, they keep stuff fuzzy. You have that friend or coworker that likes to keep stuff fuzzy, not really sure what we're going to work on, kick it down the road. Wonder why we're doing that. Teams that commit, these are the groups that actually can come together and say, you know what, we're going to make a mistake. We're actually going to try to learn from it. I'm a big fan of making an aggressive mistake as opposed to a passive one. But then whatever we learn from that, let's adjust our behaviors accordingly. Are we okay with that? As opposed to, you want to know what? We can't afford to mess up. We have to be sure in our decisions. Think about that. Sorry, I'm just having way too many flashbacks on that one. But have you ever been scared to try something? You ever been scared to try something? That's a tough way to work. If it's like, wow, we could learn something if we do this. No, we absolutely can't do it. We cannot afford to fail. We are mission critical. Everyone's mission critical at this point. Why are we really not committing to one another? Those are the things to ask. Think about those behaviors, these 4. Do you see more on this side or more on that side for your team? Well, let's go ahead and keep going because I gave you some big words: commitment, conflict, trust. Well, once we've come together as a team and said, hey, here's something we're going to really get done, say, yeah, go team. There might be a period of time where you see something going a little bit sideways and someone has to stand up and say something. This can be uncomfortable. It can be unpopular sometimes. But imagine a world where you couldn't do that. Imagine a team where you actually couldn't speak your mind, where you saw something going off a little bit. And this is a throwback to a word you saw earlier, and that's accountability. Because some teams have an avoidance of this accountability. There's an unwillingness to actually call their peers out on performance-related issues that tie directly to why they're coming in. And this is that elephant in the room with so many teams that I work with. There are groups that are like, oh, yeah, we feel that we can be open with one another. We have no problem passionately debating things. We can rally around and say, this is what we're going. But when things start to go off a little bit, suddenly, everyone knows what's going on. You know what's going on, but you feel that you can't do it. You can't say it. There's an unwillingness to actually talk about that elephant in the room, and that can really hurt a team. Because what of these behaviors do you see? Now, teams that hold one another accountable, this is a group that's going to actually respect one another because they're going to hold each other to the same high standards of what it means to be on this team. A team that avoids the accountability, this is a group where some resentment might be bubbling underneath the surface because there's different performance standards for different team members. You know what that means? You ever had that team member that shows up late 5 minutes to every meeting? Ever seen that? You know what that says to me? That says everything. Just think about it. When's the last time you actually called that person out on it? When's the last time you actually asked that person, hey, did you notice this? You know that coworker that used to get away with a little bit rough behavior? I was that when I was younger. I used to use results as an excuse to act like a real pain in the neck, being completely honest. And should I have a different standard than the rest of my team? Absolutely not. The team I'm on right now, we hold each other to an extremely high standard, and it's rearing its head right now. And oh yeah, we will speak our mind on that. So think about that. Which side of the fence do you see your group on? Here's some other behaviors to think about. This is a group, the ones that actually hold themselves accountable. They avoid any of that unnecessary paperwork, bureaucracy around actually saying, let's make some corrective actions to this behavior. When you see teams that avoid the accountability, this is where we're going to burden someone else, like either the team leader or someone outside, or I'll just throw it over to HR. We'll just call Chris, let him deal with it. If that's the sole source of discipline, maybe we're not comfortable speaking our mind and we can't talk about the elephant in the room. Think about it. If you can't speak your mind because you're not even really rallied around something we all have our ideas in, maybe it's because we didn't commit to something together, fully, wholeheartedly. Well, why didn't we do that? Well, because we didn't have everybody's ideas on the table. Why didn't we have everybody's ideas on the table? Well, because we weren't able to have that passionate, unfiltered debate, because we're scared of conflict. Well, why are we scared of that? Because we don't trust each other. All of these behaviors are interlinked. You might be awesome in one area, but when you look, that foundation might have some cracks in it. These are all dangerous things to consider and behaviors you might see, because there's another word I want to put on your radar. And that radar, it might be getting a little bit bigger right now, putting a lot of words on your radar. But when I see this, I mean, these stock photos are so cheesy. I love it. I love these stock photos. I mean, I've never made that kind of a smile at work. Maybe once. But groups of people love to win. Nothing feels better than winning. I'll tell you right now, when you win as a group, when you can sit there and the confetti's fall and you say, wow, that was awesome. High five, team. That feels good. When you actually can get some real results collectively, that feels amazing. However, think about all those unhealthy behaviors we talked about coming up to this point. Those folks that can't be like unguarded, vulnerable around their teammates. They're scared of actually having that conflict. They can't make those commitments. They don't speak their mind. If you see all of that, what can happen to a group is this could be a group that loses, they take their eye off the ball. They lose the big picture and they have an inattention to results. This is where you might lose the focus on winning as a team and just worry about your particular area or just yourself. This is a dangerous place because suddenly you start worrying about your individual needs. When you have an inattention to results, you'll hear phrases like, at least I got my stories done. You ever heard that? Oh, if those people in sales would just get it together, we here in delivery, we're meeting our end of the bargain. You ever heard that? It's a dangerous place to be in. When I hear that, that breaks my heart because that's not winning as a squad. That's not winning as a team. You want to win as a team. You win and lose as a team. If you hear phrases like that, that's like saying the hole's on your side of the boat, not mine. Think about that. It doesn't make any sense. That's why you need to be really focused in on how are we going to win as a team? How are we going to focus in on collective results to win together? When you do that, you're going to hold on to those teammates that want to be a part of a winning team. Nothing breaks my heart more than when a team loses sight of collective winning and you lose those people who really want to win as a team. You ever had that friend or coworker that was like, I just can't do this. I got to go find another place that's going to better fit what I want and fit my skills and work the way I want to and work with me the way I want to. Nothing breaks my heart than seeing a high potential go away. That's a bummer to me. That's really no good. Teams that are actually focused on these collective results, they're going to benefit from those people staying because you're going to get the ideas from them. You're going to get all this real intrinsic motivation of we're going to try to win together as a squad. Amazing things. But teams not focused this way, they might encourage people, hey, you want to know what? Here's how you can win. Keep your head down. If you do this, this is how you play the game. Just make sure marketing is good and sales will be fine. These are dangerous places to be. So where do you see yourself? On one side of the fence or the other? These are concepts you need to think about and consider. So at this point, you might be thinking like, whoa, Chris, you're giving me a little bit too much. By the way, for those of you who know where that clip of Keanu Reeves come from, that's actually from the first TED Talk in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I know it's awful. It's awful. So here's some takeaways I want you to think about. Whenever folks are coming together and you're trying to work as a team, it's one thing to consider the basics. It's one thing to consider those attributes we talked about. But it's another thing to consider these interpersonal behaviors. So here's some things I want you to consider. First, you want to try to be vulnerable around one another. Try to be open. You want to make yourself more human. If someone is just an email address, you're just going to be treated like that. Try to make yourself more human. You want to passionately debate the important stuff. When I say the important stuff, There are times when you're going to have that. That's okay. But rarely will that be, oh no, that text box needs to be 156 pixels. Oh no, it has to be 158. Oh no, it has to be 156. Really? Is that the hill you're really going to? No. Debate the important stuff. Another thing to think about is this. You want to make decisions clearly and confidently. You want to know why you make a decision as a group. Why did you make that call? This is why we made that call. And you can back up your decision. When you can make those clear decisions together, really good things can start to stem from that. And I also encourage you, call each other out when needed, when it's appropriate. Some people overcorrect on this. It's like, oh, I have no problem calling somebody else out. Well, I want you to think of that person that can give, but they can't take. It's mutual from this standpoint. We have to be mutually accountable to one another. And you want to focus on winning as a team. Don't worry about that situation of, oh, at least I got my stories done. You want to avoid that at all. It's well, at least sales got it done. No, we're trying to win together. Try to avoid that situation of the holes on your side of the boat. Teamwork is hard, but it's completely worth it. It takes time, it takes effort. Sometimes it takes late night phone calls and a lot of sweat, a lot of tears, but it is worth it. If you'd like to read a little bit more of what inspires me for these concepts, these play a really big role as far as what I do when I work with my teams. The Wisdom of Teams, this particular book is fantastic. Katzenbeck and Smith. This is not an Agile book. This is a people book. And it gives you these wonderful stories spanning lots of different industries about people coming together and caring about each other from a human level, things to think about, attributes that you can go ahead and exhibit just to go ahead and get to the basic level of what might be a team. This is an extremely powerful book. Strongly recommend it. The other book, for those of you who maybe have seen it, be like, I've seen some of those words before. Patrick's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, is wonderful. You will see some instructors or speakers just kind of just throw the 5 of them up and say, absence of trust, call it a day. You want to look at the links of these behaviors and how one can affect another. 2 wonderful books that I cannot give you enough wonderful feedback on. And that's one request, to check those books out. But this is another request that I would have. In times of what's going on right now, these unprecedented times, people are kind of in a heightened state of emotion. And it was already tough enough working together. But we could all use a big dose of a couple things. And this is just my request to you. If you're interacting with other people, I ask you to consider these 4 words. Try to treat each other with a little bit of humanity. We're all on the same team. End of the day, we're all on the same team. Try to look at somebody else, not as like an enemy, or an email address, as another human being. That's one part. Try to treat them with decency. Being a decent person. Like, am I being decent? This is something that is unfortunately kind of being eroded a little bit right now. Treat each other with a bit of decency. Treat each other with class. There's a lot of words that mean a lot to me. When I see class, I think of my father and his father before him, because whenever anybody would talk about my dad and his father, be like, wow, your dad's a classy guy. And for me, there is no bigger compliment than that. Like I just well up with how proud I am of my father when I hear your dad's, he's a class act. And you want to know the best part about being classy? It's free. All of this is free. But also this, I want you to treat people with grace. Be graceful. Please, if you could just consider treating each other with some humanity, dignity, class, and grace. You sprinkle a little bit into any of that when you're working with others, regardless of all that other stuff I share with you, good things can probably happen. So that's what I have for you tonight. If any of this is interesting to you, this is just a little tidbit of some of the things that I talk about in some of my learning experiences. If you'd like to reach out to me, my email's right there. And, I've connected with a bunch of you on LinkedIn coming up to this, so thank you for that. I've got a number of publicly listed dates scheduled all the way out through the end of the year. I know a lot of folks maybe have their fundamental level certs, but if you wanted to take the next step, our ACSM and CSPSM, they're things that we really enjoy offering, and something that we've got up both in October and November. So if you'd like to come on out, love to work with you. And folks, that's what I've got today. So seriously, I'll give you all a hand. Thank you.